The broadcast of the regular meeting of the Policy and Government Oversight Committee will now begin.
Good afternoon. My name is Andrea Jenkins, and I am the chair of the Policy and Government Oversight Committee. I will call to order our regular committee meeting for Tuesday, November 10th. I'd like to note for the record that this meeting has remote participation by council members and city staff as authorized under the Minnesota Open Meeting Law, Section 13D.021, due to the declared state of local public health emergency. At this time, I will ask the clerk to now call the roll to verify the presence of a quorum.
Councilmember Rake. Gordon.
Here.
Fletcher.
Here.
Cunningham.
Present.
Osmond.
Here.
Goodman.
Present.
Kano. Bender.
Here.
Schrader.
Here.
Johnson.
Here.
Palmisano.
Present.
Councilmember Rake. Kano. Vice Chair Ellison.
Present.
Chair Jenkins.
Here.
There are 11 members present.
Ms. Clerk, and let the record reflect that we do have a quorum. Colleagues, we have 16 items on today's agenda, including a public hearing and 4 discussion items, 2 of which are part of our finance subcommittee. Seeing as this is our first time all getting together since the Saturday announcement or declaration of the Biden-Harris ticket as the president and vice president-elect, I just want to take a moment to congratulate our elections team on their efforts to help us have a record turnout in bringing this level of democracy to our community and to the country as a whole, and to just thank everybody who has worked tirelessly to bring about this change in our country, hopefully a change for a brighter future for our country. So again, we have 16 items. And we will begin with item number 1 on the agenda, which is a public hearing for the 2020 levy for special assessments related to the nuisance condition abatement, unpaid administrative enforcement fees and fines, Tenant Remedy Act, and the emergency housing repair. We will begin with a staff presentation from Nick Magrino, from the Department of Regulatory Services. Nick.
Hi, good afternoon, Chair Jenkins and committee members. I am Nick Magrino. I coordinate the Administrative Hearings Program in Regulatory Services. I'm here today to present the 2020 Special Assessment Levy for inspections related fees and fines. Typically, this is something that would go to the Economic Development and Regulatory Services Committee, but with the reorganization this year, we're having it go to the Policy and Government Oversight Committee since the hearings are scheduled for what would have been the same time, and we have the full council for this meeting. Can we go to the next slide here? Just to summarize this process, in Minneapolis, if we have unpaid fees and fines for a variety of different things, so things like unpaid administrative citations or fees for nuisance abatement or reinspection fees, vacant building registration fees, a few other things. We collect that money by adding it to property taxes rather than sending it to like a collections agency. And in order to do that, we have to go through a hearing process, which is mandated by state law. And then ultimately at the end of the year, the city council has to sign off on the levy, and then we send that to Hennepin County to add to property taxes. So for everything included in the levy, except for one type of particular assessment, which is ordered by courts, we send what's called the notice of intent to assess letter that explains people's appeal rights and instructs them on how they could prepay that this year, or what would happen if it's added to their taxes if it remains unpaid at the end of November. This year, we did do 6 in-person hearings prior to the COVID-19 pandemic. We did cancel 2 that were on the calendar, and then ultimately ended up setting up an online appeal process, and we've had 22 of those hearings. We gave people the option to either call in or join in Microsoft Teams to do a video conference. Those ended up going, I think, fairly well. We were pretty flexible with dates and times and technical issues, and so I think we were able to get everybody heard who wanted to be heard. And then at the end of the year, people do have the option, after the city council approves the levy, to appeal that in Hennepin County District Court, and that's something that was also explained on the notice of intent to assess letter. If we go to the next page here, there's just a breakdown of what the individual levies are. So there's, a few things. We have unpaid administrative citations from a number of different departments, as well as particular abatement costs for things like, if we cut down a hazardous tree or if we remove trash from somebody's yard. Those are things that we recoup from this process as well. You're welcome to look at the individual numbers on there. The total levy for this year came out as of last week to 2.2 million. We will continue to take prepayments up until November 25th, and so that number will shrink a little bit before it's sent over to Hennepin County. So we will continue to take those. And then, yeah, I think that's it for me. I'm happy to stand for any questions if anybody has them.
Thank you for that presentation. Are there any questions? Council Member Gordon.
Yeah, I was just curious about the total levy amount. Is that consistent with years previous, or is that higher or lower? Do we know? Have we checked that?
Chair Jenkins and Council Member Gordon. Last year's offhand, by the time it went to the council, I believe was 2.4. It is something that has steadily decreased for the 7 or 8 years that I've been doing this. In particular, if you look at some of the larger ticket items on the list, things like the vacant building registration fee are a pretty large chunk of that. And as there are fewer vacant properties in the city compared to 6, 7, 8 years ago, the total amount has definitely gone down.
Thanks, I appreciate that, and I actually think we'd rather get compliance and not see this at such a big amount, but I think it's also reasonable. But thanks for that information.
Councilmember Goodman.
Thank you, Madam Vice Chair. I'm wondering if Mr. Magrino could just speak a bit about the number 2, the levies with regard to the Tenant Remedies Act. Were those specific actions we took with landlords who were not treating their tenants appropriately, and there's an assessment against a building? Can you tell us a little more about that?
Yeah, Chair Jenkins and Council Member Goodman. So there are 2 somewhat newer items on here. We have the Tenant Remedy Act, as well as at the end there, the Emergency Housing Repair Board. The Tenant Remedy Act is when we have a court-ordered repair. So if a court appoints an administrator, we have the ability to go in and make, typically the administrator would go in and make the repairs, and then we have the ability to add the cost of those repairs as an assessment without doing the formal hearing. The last item on there, the Emergency Housing Repair Board, is a newer item for us, and that's a situation where the city decides that there is an emergency housing issue at a property. So A good example might be if a boiler goes out in the winter, we don't necessarily want to wait 3 weeks for that item to get repaired. So we may go in and do that repair and then charge it to the landlord. I think for both of these items, there were 2 on each. There were 2 Tenant Remedy Act assessments as well as 2 Emergency Housing Repair Board assessments.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Thank you, Mr. McGrath. It seems like the system's working. That's why I was asking about it. Thank you.
Thank you again, Mr. Magrino. And seeing as there's no other questions, I will now open up the public hearing. Do we have any one here to speak to this item?
Chair Jenkins, there's one person who was ready to speak and she's currently not on the line.
I see. I will just ask one more time if there are any speakers on the line that wish to speak to this item. Certainly will entertain your thoughts. Seeing none, I will now close the public hearing and move this item for approval. And is there any discussion? Council Member Bender.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Councilmember Goodman already highlighted this, but did just want to underscore that the new activities that are focused on holding landlords accountable and also making sure that rental housing in our city is up to standard, that it is safe and livable and habitable, is the result of our work on the Renter First policy that directed rec services and other city departments to prioritize the health and safety and stability of our renters in the housing that we regulate. And I think it's a real success story for using policy tools, regulatory tools, budget tools like the $2 million fund that we set aside, the revolving fund that's helping pay for some of those repairs on the front end. Our city attorney's office's expertise, our partnerships with legal aid and volunteer lawyers network, and the advocates who are organizing renters, along with the many property owners in our city that do comply with our rules and that do their very best to support health and stability for folks who rent their homes. So anyway, it's nice to see it here. It's notable that I think when we take a stronger approach to regulating, and that when landlords know that we're serious about enforcing our rules, I think we will see more compliance. So I think these tools that we have in place to support renters are really working, and appreciate the chance to underscore that. Thanks.
Thank you, President Bender. And is there any further discussion? Seeing none, I will ask the clerk to now call the roll.
Councilmember Rake.
Aye.
Gordon.
Aye.
Fletcher.
Aye.
Cunningham.
Aye.
Osmond.
Aye.
Goodman.
Aye.
Kano. Bender.
Aye.
Schrader.
Aye.
Johnson.
Aye.
Palmisano.
Aye.
Kano. Vice Chair Ellison.
Aye.
Chair Jenkins.
Aye.
There are 12 ayes.
And that item carries. Next on our agenda, That item carries, and that recommendation will be referred to the City Council meeting for final action. Next, we have our consent agenda, which has 12 items. Items 2 through 13 on our agenda. Items 2 through 10 are various contract amendments related to the public service building project. Details are listed on the agenda. Item number 11 approves the 2020 property tax special assessments for delinquent utility charges and authorizes utility billing to cancel any assessments as a result of payment. Item number 12 authorizes a 1-year contract with the Minnesota Historical Society to develop a comprehensive interpretive zone plan. Item number 13 is a gift acceptance of sponsorships for the 2020 Trans Equity Summit. Would any of my colleagues like to pull any of these items from today's consent agenda? I will take that silence as a no, and I will move approval of the consent agenda. Is there any discussion? Is there any discussion? Seeing none, the clerk will call the roll on the consent agenda.
Councilmember Rake.
Aye.
Gordon.
Aye.
Fletcher.
Aye.
Cunningham.
Aye.
Osmond.
Aye.
Goodman.
Aye.
Kano. Bender.
Aye.
Schrader.
Aye.
Johnson.
Aye.
Palmisano.
Aye.
Kano.
Aye.
Vice Chair Ellison.
Aye.
Chair Jenkins.
Aye.
There are 13 ayes.
And that item carries, and the consent agenda is approved. Items number 14 and 15 are updates from our finance subcommittee, and I will invite Councilmember Fletcher, who is the chair of that subcommittee, to lead us in this portion of our meeting.
Thank you, Council Vice President. We have 2 items on the Finance Subcommittee. One that it turns out was not ready for moving through committee, and so I'm going to move that item 14 related to Meet Minneapolis be deleted from the agenda. And then item 15, I'll move that we receive and file the 2020 third quarter financial report on the results of select city funds.
Chair Fletcher, it's Casey. I'm sorry to interrupt here. If you've made that motion as the chair of the subcommittee, then the next action is to ask the clerk to call the roll on the report of the finance subcommittee, which essentially deletes from the agenda item 14 and receives and files item number 15 with no other further actions.
Very good. We have not been fully handing the chair over for the subcommittee typically, so I was not clear on the procedure, but I'm happy to move forward. Clerk, please call the roll on my motion.
Councilmember Rake.
Aye.
Gordon.
Aye.
Fletcher.
Aye.
Cunningham.
Aye.
Osmond.
Aye.
Goodman.
Aye.
Kano. Bender.
Aye.
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 Schrader.
Aye.
Johnson,
Aye.
Palmisano,
Aye.
Vice Chair Ellison,
Aye.
Chair Jenkins.
Aye.
There are 13 ayes.
Thank you, Councilmember Fletcher. And for discussion, item number 16 on our agenda is a report, as well as a resolution honoring Trans Day of Remembrance 2020, which we will read at the full council meeting on Friday. But this report is coming from the Division of Race and Equity, and Trachtenberg will be presenting this report, and I will invite Track to provide that presentation.
Thank you, Chair Jenkins. Hello, Chair Jenkins and council members. My name is Trachtenberg. I'm the Trans Equity Project Coordinator in the Division of Race and Equity. Next Friday is Trans Day of Remembrance, an annual event recognized worldwide where we remember and celebrate those lost due to transphobia in the previous year. This year has been the deadliest yet in the US for trans individuals, with 34 recorded deaths from murders alone, the majority of which were of Black trans women and femmes. One of these was a Minneapolis resident, Christine Zephyr, and we say her name. Trans Day of Remembrance is also marked as Trans Day of Resilience to honor the resilience, power, and work of our trans and gender nonconforming community, striving to create a world where every trans person is alive, safe, and able to live the life they deserve. Since 2014, the City of Minneapolis has explicitly committed to both trans equity work and racial equity work, which are, as we know, inextricably connected. Today, we bring an update on the scope and accomplishments of the trans equity work so far and its future direction as we work together to create a place where every trans resident can live safely. Next slide, please. In 2014, the city established the Trans Issues Work Group, a primarily internal group of city staff and a few community partners. 2014 also marked the city's first annual Trans Equity Summit, an event which has grown each year since then. At the recommendation of the Trans Issues Work Group, the city also created a new appointed board, the Transgender Equity Council, in 2017. And the Transgender Equity Council, or TEC, presented recommendations to the Peace Council Committee, in the fall of both 2018 and 2019, which I'll speak to more in a minute. Next slide, please. I'm going to speak a bit to the Trans Equity Summit over the past few years. As you can see from the numbers on these slides, the number of registrants for the summit, have grown each year. There's one typo on here. The 2019 summit has 492, not 192 registrants. To speak to some of the additional pieces that have grown, in 2019, we added a healing space offering bodywork and tarot readings, amongst other things, which was one of the most highly reviewed parts of the summit that year, and expanded it in 2020 to encompass aesthetic offerings, including makeup tutorials, and to feature presenters that better represented our entire trans and GNC community, including more offerings by trans women and femmes. Our programming has grown each year. The Job and Resource Fair is now incorporated into the same day as the rest of the summit to increase accessibility. 2019 was also the first year that we solicited workshop proposals from the community instead of solely seeking out the specific workshops that the Summit Planning Committee dreamed up, and the number of workshops and scope of those workshops has grown each of the past 7 years. In addition, additional numbers of community members have been involved in developing and shaping the summit each year as it has grown, and we've been able to secure enough financial support from the recast grant in the Division of Race and Equity and from external sponsors to supplement general fund trans equity funding and therefore compensate more community members, including all presenters. Lastly, this year, of course, due to the pandemic, we transitioned the summit to a virtual event and expanded it to multiple days to increase its accessibility so that we wouldn't be asking people to sit all day in a virtual summit. And we're able to make that transition successfully as well from the feedback we have gotten. Next slide, please. I also want to speak a little bit to some of the specific policy accomplishments, for example, of the trans equity work. As you can see, in 2016 and 2017, the Issues Work Group both recommended police policy and procedure and helped the city make a commitment to all gender bathrooms in city buildings. In 2018, the TEC helped to start a gender inclusivity 101 training for city employees that has now been accessed by multiple departments. In 2019, we saw the city's first part-time temporary staff role in trans equity, the successful banning of conversion therapy in Minneapolis, the Stonewall Oral History Project, and work with the Facility, Space, and Asset Management Committee in terms of bathrooms in city buildings, amongst other things. And in 2020, highlighting our first full-time permanent trans equity staff role, 4 community listening sessions around the scope and direction of the trans equity work with more to come, and a partnership with the Minnesota Department of Health to create COVID-19 LGBTQ+ biweekly community briefings. Next slide, please. Having talked through all of this, I want to talk a little bit more about the next directions of this work. And I want to highlight that I think I might have not sent in the most updated version of this slide. So the bottom left box should say technical assistance support to departments around community engagement. But there is a lot of work that's already in progress around community engagement and outreach, already beginning to plan next year's summit, trans equity work strategic planning as part of the Division of Race and Equity strategic planning, and as I mentioned, technical assistance support to other departments around community engagement and other work with trans and GNC communities. For each thing that's in progress, I have also listed what are the needs that allow this work to continue moving. Next slide, please. And finally, I want to speak a little bit more to the other directions this work could go by highlighting the recommendations that the Transgender Equity Council has made in 2018 and 2019 and highlighting their extensive research and the success of that work. They have made recommendations around bathrooms, specifically all gender bathroom construction in city buildings and enforcing equitable bathroom access in non-city buildings, both of which require staff commitment and capacity, around a public awareness campaign, anti-discrimination standards, and trainings for housing, both rentals and shelters, both of which would be budget neutral and require just staff commitment, and a work that is already in progress, training and inclusion requirements around trans and GNC inclusivity in city contracts and grants, and further growing the gender inclusivity training that city staff receive, both of which are things that rely on funding and staff commitment and capacity. Additionally, current TEC members have expressed interest in the impact of the city's austerity measures on trans community members. With staff commitment from relevant departments, we could explore the impact of programs that are being cut on trans and GNC community members and ensure that when positions are restructured or refilled, the less formal parts of their role, such as relationships held in community, do not disappear in the shuffle. I'm going to pause here, and having kind of highlighted some of the trajectory of the trans equity work over the past few years and the future directions it has the potential to go, in the hopes that we can be a city that continues to hold this commitment, I am happy to stand for any questions.
Thank you so much, Track, for that great presentation, and really highlighting the efforts of the trans equity work that has been going on over the past 7 years. And really, you know, acknowledging that this year has been one of the deadliest years for trans and gender nonconforming people, and predominantly for Black and Brown trans women. It really is important that we continue to support this work and lift up your efforts. I'm really impressed that the 2020 Trans Equity Summit was able to go on in the midst of the pandemic and all of the other challenges that we have been facing as a city and as a nation, quite frankly. And not only did it go on, but increased attendance and participation from members throughout our community. And I think even broader than just the city of Minneapolis, given that it was a virtual event, we were able to include people from outstate and out of the state as well. So so kudos. Any conversation or questions or remarks from my colleagues? Councilmember Cunningham.
Thank you. Excuse me. Thank you, Madam Vice President, and thank you, Track, for this presentation, and thank you for all your hard work. I just really think it's necessary for us to name how lucky we are as a municipality to have trans equity work integrated into and institutionalized into our city enterprise. That's a really big deal, and a lot of cities look to Minneapolis with how forward-thinking that is, and it's forward-thinking for not trans cisgender people. For us trans folks, it feels like common sense to think about equity from an intersectional space, much as Track said. You have race equity, you have trans equity, and those two things are interconnected in ways that really cannot be separated. And so I really, and I think it's also necessary to name that we have some of the most brilliant trans folks in the country who are volunteering their time to help the city be better and do better and think smarter and make policies from a deeper analysis than we would have done just in our own silos. Representation matters. It does matter that there's 2 Black trans folks on the city council. That definitely does make a difference. And also at the same time, we're elected leaders, and what we need to make sure happens is that when we are no longer in these positions of leadership, that those voices live on and are institutionalized, and that space is permanently created. And so thank you, Track, for all that you do. It's challenging to pick up work and that's new and help to shape it and define it while also giving space for multiple community members to shape and define it. That is a very challenging line to walk, and you've done a really amazing job. So I just want to give a big thank you and also raise and praise all of the volunteers, the trans and gender nonconforming, non-binary folks who take their time and willingly give it to the city so that we can all be better. So just want to say thank you to everyone involved, and thank you for your leadership, Track.
Thank you, Councilmember Cunningham. Any other questions or comments from my colleagues? Yeah, again, Track, your efforts are outstanding in this space, and really just again congratulate you on a really successful 2020 summit. But recognizing that this has been one of the most deadly years for trans and gender nonconforming people, and so as we thought about this this presentation and Track really is always on the forefront of really, I think, being considerate of the community. We didn't want to re-traumatize our community with this presentation or by, lifting up the work that the city is doing. But I really think that it is really important that we lift up the work that you and the volunteers are doing to make this a great city to live in. And so thank you so much for your work and your efforts and for this presentation. And I will move that the clerk file this report for future reference. Thank you, Trey. And before we move to our
Madam Chair,
yeah.
Item number 16 does include a resolution that is before the body today.
Yes. So I will then ask the clerk to call a roll and move. I will move this presentation and move the resolution and ask the clerk to call a roll. Is that the appropriate response?
Yes, correct. Councilmember Reich.
Aye.
Gordon.
Aye.
Fletcher.
Aye.
Cunningham.
Aye.
Osmond.
Aye.
Goodman.
Aye.
Kano.
Aye.
Bender.
Aye.
Schrader.
Aye.
Johnson.
Aye.
Palmisano.
Aye.
Vice Chair Ellison.
Aye.
Chair Jenkins.
Aye.
There are 13 ayes.
That item carries. And so I just wanted to just double check before we move to item number 17 for discussion that we just clarify. I believe that there was a staff report for item number 15 and just wanted to ensure that we either do that report or that we are comfortable with reviewing that report online. Councilmember Fletcher, do you have any thoughts on this item?
Council Vice President, since it hadn't been listed on discussion, I had assumed that that had been changed on the agenda. I know there were some changes after agenda setting. If there are staff prepared to make a report and they want to provide a brief report on this item, I know we had discussed getting a brief update, and I'd be happy to receive it if other colleagues think that's appropriate.
Mr. Chair, I believe that our controller, Mr. Hodges, Lyle Hodges from the Department of Finance and Property and Services and others are on the call and are prepared to make that presentation if the body wishes.
I will leave that at your discretion, Madam Chair.
Thank you, Councilmember Fletcher. And point of information for the clerk, do we need to have a vote of the body to determine if we want to review that report, or
Madam
is
Vice
that
President,
the chair's discretion?
I think that's at your discretion. If members of the body would like to see that report, certainly staff are prepared. It's been published. It's part of the agenda and available for public review as well. If not, the motion was already made and approved to receive and file that report, and it will become part of the public record.
Thank you, Mr. Clerk. President Bender.
Thanks, Madam Chair. Thanks to Councilmember Gordon for asking about this. I did have some questions reviewing the materials. It looks like we're projected to be below revenue and above expenditures this year as compared to previous years. So, I think it's worth hearing the information. I'm not sure what other folks thought reviewing the slides, but it's certainly not like a routine typical presentation. There's some changes from previous years due to the pandemic and other related things. So
excellent point. And with that in mind, I will ask that we receive the presentation as planned, if the presenters are available.
So I think Mr. Hodges is on the line, as well as some of the others from the finance department, and we would certainly then, Madam Vice President, encourage Mr. Hodges and his team to give the presentation. I believe the technical team has pulled up that report, so you should be able to see that on your screens.
Mr. Hodges, are you available?
I am. Chair Jenkins and members of the committee, thank you for having me today. As I was introduced, I'm Lyle Hodges from Finance and Property Services. This is a presentation on the overview of the financial status as of third quarter ending September 30th, 2020. And there is a more detailed PDF report available for those that want more detail. Next slide. So, as noted by some of the commenters before this, the financial picture of the city as a whole is complicated by the ongoing impacts of the COVID-19 pandemic. The nature of those impacts and our responses as a city in a financial capacity creates a situation where the projections and the expectations can change rapidly. For that reason, I want to mention, again, the information presented here is as of September 30th, 2020, and I would expect that some of these projections will change before we close our fiscal year. As I'm sure you're aware, in July, the city did receive just under $32.3 million in federal CARES Act funding. That activity and the expenditures for it needs to be wrapped up basically by the end of this week, so November 15th is the final deadline. For reference, we have averaged about $52 million in federal spending over the last 4 years, so that is a significant bump in 2020 for federal funding. Overall cash and investment position as of September 30th, 2020 is just under $900 million. That can be compared to last year at this time, cash and investments totaling $965 million. We are projected to meet our cash balance reserve requirements in all but two major funds. They'll be positive cash, but they just won't meet that minimum cash target, and that is the sanitary sewer and municipal parking funds. So next slide. General fund overview, it's used to account for all financial resources except those that are required to be accounted for in a separate fund. Our year-end projected fund balance is just under 112 million, which is a $16 million decrease from where we started the year. We are still projected to exceed our minimum fund balance at 17% of next year's general fund budget, and that amounts to 80.8 million. So 80.8 is the minimum fund balance requirement. The original budget in 2020 included a $10 million use of fund balance, and through two phases of budgetary reductions earlier this year, we reduced the budget in the general fund by 39 million. I think it's important to point out too, we are projected to spend 38.8 million less than what was originally adopted as a budget, so that just reflects the efforts of all the departments to decrease spending. On the other side of the equation is probably where we have kind of a bigger number there. So we've got revenue is expected to decrease by 44.9 million. And that's the combination of lost revenue from things like property taxes, licenses and permits, franchise fees, and others, as well as a reduction of transfers in equaling $22 million. So that transfer in would have come from local taxes in the Downtown Assets Fund. So, and here again, the cash balance, we're projecting a year-end balance of around 131 million, which would be about 15 million less than where we started the year. Next. So this chart shows some comparisons to previous years. It's got the previous 4 years plus our 2020 projections. There's a lot going on here, of course, but the two lines that we might look at would be, like I mentioned, that licenses and permits line is down, projected to be down for 2020. And then again, our transfers in were strategically reduced in order to preserve the cash from those downtown assets funds, as our local taxes in that area are significantly lower than budgeted. And the graph at the bottom, just represents the the numbers. So next slide, please. So this is specific to 2020, and it's a graph that shows how we're trending compared to the average revenue that we collect as a percent of budget in previous 3 years. So the blue bar on the left side of each quarter shows that we are trending under budget or under previous years as compared to budget, and that's again due to the things I've mentioned previously. We are projected to finish the year at 91.4% of budget, where we typically exceed the budget on revenues at 105.6%. Next slide. So again, very similar to the revenue chart, this is the expenditures by category over the past 4 years plus our 2020 projections. Again, transfers out are down, and the budget was significantly lower in 2020 to begin with, and $5 million was removed from that transfer out. Again, trying to save cash in different areas as we go through the year. And once again, the graph at the bottom is representative of the numbers above it. Next slide. So here again, we're comparing 2020 to previous years, and contrasting to the revenue graph, you can see that we are exceeding expenditures as a percent of budget. And in this case, it isn't necessarily because we're spending more totally, it's because we're spending more as a percent of our budget. And again, we did make those budgetary reductions in July and August to reduce the budget. So our percent of spending as compared to budget is looking like we'll end up at just over 100% of our original or our amended budget will be spent. Here again, typically we would see that we only spend about 96.7% of our general fund budget. Next slide. So the next 3 slides here are going to go through the different fund types, and we'll start with the special revenue funds. Special revenue funds are used to account for and report the proceeds of specific revenues. They're restricted or committed to expenditures for specific purposes. The city's significant special revenue funds are the Convention Center, Target Center, as well as the Downtown Assets Group, the MPD Forfeiture Gambling Fund, NCR Reg Services Special Revenue Funds, the grant funds, both federal and other, and then our Community Planning and Economic Development group of special revenue funds. Total fund balance in the special revenue funds collectively is looking like about an $18 million decrease compared to where we ended 2019. Cash similarly decreasing by about $14 million compared to the 2019 year end. Also important, like I mentioned before, the numbers probably will change as we go through the rest of the year. And here's a case where prior to refunding the convention center debt, the special revenue funds cash was projected to decrease by $39 million. So if you go back to the second quarter, before the refunding was issued, we had a larger loss of cash in these funds. Again, the decrease in these areas are primarily due to that loss of local tax revenue related to the shutdown of businesses throughout the city. In these funds, the fund balance is usually set aside for that specific purpose for which the revenue was collected, and so we call that assigned. Sometimes it's restricted or committed if it's more official. Next slide, please. So the internal service funds, these funds are used to account for goods and services provided internally to other city departments, and we've got 6 primary internal service funds. You can read them there. Total net position at year-end 2020 is projected to be about $154.2 million, which is actually a $10 million increase from where we started the year. Total cash at year-end projected to be $159 million. Again, a slight increase over where we ended 2019. And these funds Because they're providing services internally, we have a significant amount of control over their spending. We can delay projects, we can defer upgrades, and those actions that were taken to do those financial savings are why we're seeing a slight increase in this group of funds. And next slide, please. So finally, we've got the enterprise funds. These are used to account for operations that sell goods and services to external third parties. Once again, we've got the 5 primary utility funds and then the CPED enterprise fund. In these group of funds, net position at year end is projected to be down about 44 million from where we started the year, and cash is also projected to be down about 33 million from where we started the year. Again, revenue losses coupled with ongoing capital projects, debt service obligations, and frankly, just expenses that we can't avoid are driving these decreases. And with that, I have nothing further.
Thank you, Mr. Hodges. Are there any questions or comments from my colleagues? Any questions? Thank you for this sobering report.
Madam Chair, I did have a question.
Oh, I'm sorry, Council President.
Yeah, thanks. My question was actually about the revenue slide. Is this compared with the amended budget? You know what I mean? So we cut our budget obviously in June or July. So I'm just wondering if this revenue is down versus what we expected in the summer.
Chair Jenkins, Councilmember Bender, on the revenue side of the budget, we didn't decrease the revenue budget so much as the revenue expectations. So this is reflective of the current revenue budget, but we did not decrease it as much as the expenditure budget.
So to put it another way, is revenue down in a way that we did not expect or account for when we made the budget cuts in July?
Chair Jenkins, Councilmember Bender, these revenue projections are in line with what was assumed to be the case when the budgetary reductions were made.
Okay, thank you. That was my understanding, but that is helpful. And then it looked like expenditures were a little above what we had budgeted. Is that something we need to account for in the 2021 budget, or will we need to wait for the final information from this budget year, which ends in December? And are you anticipating that we'll need to make mid-year budget adjustments in 2021?
Chair Jenkins, Councilmember Bender, I think what this reflects is that we did reduce that expenditure budget, and so we'll meet that budget, or we'll spend to budget this year, where in previous years we've usually had a pretty comfortable margin where we're underspending budget. So I think even though it is currently November, it's probably still a little too early to tell what the final total expenditure will be and what actions will need to be taken as we get into 2021.
Okay, thank you. And I had a briefing from our finance staff about some of the risks facing us in 2021, which was did indicate a potential need for mid-year budget cuts, particularly depending on the outcome of the lawsuits that we have related to our police department, which of course are not reflected here. So this is really helpful to understand kind of how that mid-year budget this year is playing out as we look to our upcoming budget process. So thanks for that follow-up.
Thank you, Madam President. Councilmember Schrader.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I just wanted to kind of highlight the point the Council President just made.
It sounds like we've had a little bit of leeway in our budget, and just to make sure I'm understanding you right, like we just really don't have any room for adding new programs or anything new. It looks like in this year, and it looks like that will continue into next year based on the projections you have.
Chair Jenkins, Councilmember Schroeder, yeah, that would be a fair statement that we will spend. We are projecting to spend to budget in 2020, so there will be minimal budgetary amounts left on the table, so to speak.
Okay, thank you.
Any other questions or comments? All right, well, thank you again, Mr. Hodges, for that presentation. Sorry for the mix-up and confusion. We have already received this report and taken the appropriate action. So we will now move to our last discussion item, or item number 17, I'm sorry. That is a contract with Hennepin County Sheriff's Department and Metropolitan Council / Metro Transit to assist Minneapolis Police Department with law enforcement personnel under the direction and command of MPD. Chief Madero Arredondo will be providing that report. Chief, are you available?
Good afternoon, Madam Chair and council members. Appreciate the opportunity to speak with you today, really regarding this request from the council. We have unfortunately experienced unprecedented uptick in violent crime this year. Sadly, I have to report that as of to date, 74 homicides, as well as getting close to over roughly 500 of our community members who've been shot and wounded in our city, as well as a significant increase in carjackings throughout our city. This violent crime that we've been experiencing in our city this year has not been relegated to a certain neighborhood or section of our city, but it certainly has been impacting all four corners of our city. And so the ask today is for the council to provide me the opportunity to have funding available to engage in the Joint Enforcement Team initiative. The Joint Enforcement Team initiative is really a data-based focus to prevent violent crime in our city. And this has been an effort over several years ago. Back in 2014, we engaged in this back when our Northside community had been experiencing a peak in violent crime. Then it was really relegated. It began from June 1st to carry throughout the summer months to August 31st. And at that time, we had the assistance of our mutual aid partners, Hennepin County Sheriff's Office, at that time as well the State Patrol, and Minneapolis Metro Transit Police. The ask of this time is really, again, to acquire the funding to be able to really help our men and women who have been doing a phenomenal job out there trying to reduce and work under not only the pandemic, but the increases of violent crime, but really to restore peace and safety back into our city. Minneapolis Police Department right now, our resources are hemorrhaging. Our city is bleeding at this moment, and I'm trying to do all I can to stop that bleeding. And I'm hoping that through having the funds to launch a citywide Joint Enforcement Team initiative, we can try to stop the bleeding here in our city. Previous partners have been Metro Transit Police Department, Hennepin County Sheriff's Office, and the State Patrol. That being said, we are in a need to have resources to help our city. And if there are other agencies, and we have a great partners in our mutual aid organization, I'm willing to take whatever agencies who'd be willing to help us during this critical time of public safety in our city. So That is really the program in and of itself. There's some contracts that have to be worked out and signed, but at this time, again, I want to stress that there's no formal or official contracts that are being that are completed at this time. It's really just an ask right now from our city officials to help us in this effort. With that, Madam Chair, I'll pause.
Thank you, Chief. Looks like we have a comment or a question from the mayor, Mayor Fry.
Thank you, Madam Vice President. I wanted to touch on what the chief just said. You know, at this moment in time, this is an authorization to allow the chief and our city to move forward with a conversation with a combination of both Hennepin County Sheriff's Office as well as Metro Transit to see what resources we may have available to us during this time where we've seen really tremendous attrition. You know, normally on an annual basis, we see somewhere in the range of 40 to 45 officers retire or resign. Now those numbers are well beyond 100, and it does have an impact. I mean, Minneapolis neighborhoods have been subjected to an unacceptable level of violence, and specifically gun violence, and our residents and families, they've been very clear in reaching out to our city in droves and telling us that they need help, they need assistance. And one of the most core functions of city government is being able to call 911 and have a response when you are in need of assistance. You know, these are some of the most difficult times in someone's life when they need to call 911, whether it's around domestic violence or shooting. And in our department, we need to make sure we're able to respond to those calls for help. The chief has made clear and spoken plainly about the need to increase capacity in the interim before any new recruiting classes come in, and I do trust him. And let me be clear, you know, this additional resource, this additional assistance, it won't fix the problem, but it would help. And I believe that we do, in fact, have a duty to help right now. And you know, this does not go to mean that we don't need to be doing a whole lot of other work in our city. Our city is presently undergoing a massive plan to transform what public safety looks like. We have 3 new shelters that are coming online, including a very new vision for indoor community villages. We're investing in low income and affordable housing. We're doing all sorts of work around economic inclusion, and we need to do the very necessary work around public safety. You know, in most of these budget conversations on any other year, the discussions are usually centered around, should we add 10 officers or reduce 10 officers? Now we're looking at 12 times that, or more than that. And so I think it's necessary that we answer this call for public safety in our city. And so often it's the victims that get lost in the conversation. By the way, like 81% of whom are Black. We've had over 500 shootings in our city. 81% of those a Black victim. And I think it's necessary for all of us to see our responsibility and duties to provide that necessary core safety, especially during this tumultuous time. And so I do support our chief in this mission. And like I said, the work doesn't stop here. There's all sorts of work beyond. There's safety beyond policing work. There's accountability work. There's so much work that goes beyond this, but it also includes a response from officers when people need it. Thank you.
Thank you, Mayor. We have Council President Bender in queue, and several other council members, just so you guys know that I do see you.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I actually think Councilmember Gordon was ahead of me in the queue.
My apologies, Councilmember Gordon. Council President Bender is correct. You were ahead of her. Do you?
That's fine. I can have a couple questions now. I'm just curious if the funding that we're talking about, if there's extra money in the police department budget because of these early retirements and people leaving. Is there the $500,000 available in the police department's budget to cover the expenses of this proposal? And my second question is, how many FTEs will this actually provide?
Chief Arredondo, are you still available?
Yes, Madam Chair, to Councilmember Gordon, to your first question, no, as we currently stand right now, I do not have the allocated, I don't have the dollars right now to provide this this funding. So I know that the mayor and our finance team have been working on where to identify those numbers. As far as the FTEs, we are working in conversation with those agencies that would be willing to assist us to see where we could get to. While I don't see this, and again, this is speculative, but I don't see this being over 40 or so FTEs, but at the same time, I don't see it being less than 20. So the goal, a good goal would be to be having around at least 40 FTEs for this engagement.
So 40 people working full-time days from now until December, is what this will give us?
Madam Chair, to Councilmember Gordon, again, in terms of the logistics and the scheduling and all of that details, those still have yet to be finalized, but at least right now, the goal would be to have those additional resources working 7 days a week and certainly during the high volume, call volume times throughout our city.
Chief, would you mind, this is Robin, would you mind if I answered one of the questions for Councilmember Gordon?
Madam Chair, if you'd allow Director McPherson from our finance team.
Welcome, Ms. McPherson. Yes, please.
And I apologize, I'm on my phone, but I wanted to explain a little bit about the people that are on leave. On leave, you are still an employee of the city, and so they are still getting paid through the police department budget. So until people separate, they will continue to be paid through the police department budget, which means we don't see a savings until those people have actually separated from the city.
Thanks, I understand that. I wonder if we have any, this is just a last question, any figures on what it cost us at the protest? There was a protest on the freeway near my house. I think it easily lasted 6, 7, maybe there was 8 hours of law enforcement there. What impact did that have on our department budget? Because I know there were lots of Minneapolis police officers there.
Councilmember Gordon, Committee Chair Jenkins, we do not have that information yet. It probably will be next week before we do, due to the lag time of people putting in their hours. But I would be happy to get that for you once that information has been input.
Thank you.
Thank you, Councilmember Gordon. And again, my apologies, Council President Bender.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I was able to review the RCA when it was published yesterday, but I didn't see a contract included in the publicly available materials. Is there a contract that we can review for details of this agreement?
Madam Chair, to Council President Bender. So I know that we have some folks working on the contract because, again, we have not really solidified things. This is really my opportunity to see if I'm allowed to have the funding for this to move forward. But there has absolutely been conversations with prospective agencies that would be willing to help assist. So, so my understanding is that at least as of today, there's not a finalized contract at this point.
Okay, thank you. Who will be legally and financially liable for the behavior of officers under these contracts in the event of a lawsuit or civil rights complaint?
Madam Chair, to Council President, I'm sorry. Madam Chair, to Council President Bender, the way the joint enforcement teams details had been worked out in previous years. We operate under a very similar unified command system where those agencies coming into Minneapolis would be provided direction and guidance in terms of where throughout the city through that data to help us assist with violent crime. However, that being said, those agencies are also responsible for adhering to their policies, their procedures. If you consider mutual aid, for example, when those agencies assisted our city and continue to assist our city, they still have to abide by their policies and procedures as well as that. We are certainly giving them guidance as to some of our operating or standard operating procedures here in Minneapolis. I also believe that previous contracts mentioned that those agencies, in terms of indemnification and liabilities, those agencies would pick that would be responsible for that as well.
So if someone sued over the behavior of one of these officers, the other agency would be responsible for that legal and financial liability? Or does that need to be outlined in the contract? Perhaps that's really a question for the city attorney.
Madam Chair, to Council President Bender, again, just off of looking at those previous contracts back in 2014, I believe that there was specific language related to that separate jurisdiction and the responsibilities they have. But again, our city attorneys would be reviewing those.
Okay. You mentioned some of the kind of big issues facing our city. We've all been quite frustrated by this relatively small group of about a dozen very young teenagers who are stealing cars, and often there's a sort of violence or threat of violence included with those. Will these officers be focused on those carjackings or on the homicides that you mentioned? How will this resource address those specific concerns?
Madam Chair, to Council President Bender, really violent crime is why I'm asking of this resource today. So what it will help us do is we have specific MPD teams that are focused daily on trying to reduce that violent crime. This added resource will allow those folks to continue to do that, as well as, for example, Metro Transit, for example, their concentration on our public transportation platforms and hubs throughout our city that are obviously connected to our neighborhoods where they're experiencing violent crime. They'd be able to be focused on that and full-time focused on that during those shifts. And so this is an extension of a lot of the work that some of these agencies currently do, but make no doubt about it, the violent crime that we've seen, as you mentioned, the carjackings, the shootings, the shots fired, it's unacceptable. And so we would be utilizing these resources to help us mitigate and prevent the violent crime that we're seeing.
Okay, I know there are others in queue, so there might be follow-up questions about that. I'll leave for others. When I received a briefing about next year's budget, the single biggest financial risk to our city is the unknown expenses related to police lawsuits. Of course, George Floyd's, but also the lawsuits that followed in the civil unrest and the protests in the days after. My recollection is that there was a need to potentially use contingency funds to cover those expenses. Could someone in finance answer that question? Do we have enough funds in the self-insurance fund to cover the anticipated potential costs of police-involved lawsuits, or is there a potential need to use contingency or budget cuts to cover those expenses in 2021?
Madam Chair, this is Mark Ruff. I'd be happy to respond to the question if appropriate.
Mr. Ruff, go ahead, please.
All right, thank you. Chair Jenkins, Council President Bender. The short answer is we don't know what the lawsuit dollar amounts are, so I can't exactly answer the question that you are asking, but there are a multitude of financial risks that the city is facing next year. And as Mr. Hodges outlined, we do have dollars right now that are above our minimum 17% general fund contingency. We are above that by a substantial amount. And we also have uncertainties about revenues next year and how long COVID-19 is going to last. We have uncertainties about what the legislature may or may not do in terms of cuts in state aids, not just for Minneapolis, but for any jurisdiction, because the state has its own financial situation. And we have on the other side of it some optimism that just as we received some CARES money this year, with a change in the federal administration, we may see more relief for state and local governments in terms of revenue loss offset from that. So there are both potential for pluses and for minuses on the financial objectives. But the short answer is, do we have enough money in contingency to cover the request from the chief today, given what we know for 2020? The short answer is yes, we have enough in contingency to cover what the chief is asking for, but with the caution that, as you have outlined, there's uncertainty for next year as well.
The numbers that I was shown, which were quite conservative, are alarming. But as you noted, potential for the numbers to not be so large for a mid-year 2021 budget cut. Thank you. I know there are others who want to ask questions. Thanks.
Thank you, President Bender. Councilmember Palmisano, then Cunningham.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I'd like to point out that this is not an unprecedented agreement. This is a typical mutual aid agreement. I've seen 3 other contracts that we've authorized in the last 5 years. We have used joint enforcement teams in the past when city leadership have determined our existing capacity is not sufficient to address an emergency. What is unprecedented is the number of separations and officers currently unavailable for 911 response during a statistically significant increase in violent crime. I and everyone else that I have spoken with that supports this proposal today are absolutely committed to all of the transforming public safety services efforts in our city. This doesn't change that commitment. In fact, I think it complements it. It's a temporary program to assist with a significant need that we have right now. We have only just begun our community outreach efforts on transforming public safety. I'd like to lift up Councilmember Cunningham's efforts on that. And we also have pressing public safety needs today. We need to be doing something right now to address this increase in violent crime. That crime is not dispersed evenly throughout our city, and we need to be able to target areas that it is. I feel we need to support our chief and his ability to respond to this issue. That's what this authorization is today. And as the budget chair, I'm always concerned about the health and stability of our finances. I work year-round with our budget and finance teams to understand the impacts and our decision-making and what that decision-making has on our fixed spending ability. I also know that MPD is already over budget for the year, and one of the main drivers of that is how we are backfilling these vacancies with more and more overtime. Contingency funding is almost always used to cover the cost of unbudgeted overtime. So thanks, I don't want to belabor this, but I just wanted to add in those 2 cents. Thank you, Madam Chair.
Thank you, Councilmember Palmisano. Next, we have Councilmember Cunningham.
Thank you, Madam Vice President. So I have a few questions that I was hoping to be able to ask the chief. But I do just want to say that we are also, what is also unprecedented is the level of demand that we've experienced from community for increased accountability and changes in the police department. So that is what does set this particular request apart from previous years. So I think it's worthwhile to name that. So Chief, I have a few questions. The first that I have is, how much does crime typically drop annually from about the summer and fall to winter? And how does that impact 911 calls?
Madam Chair, to Councilmember Cunningham, I don't have those statistics in front of me. So I'd only be speculating at this point. Seasonally in Minnesota, winter months can oftentimes just naturally have some decreases in crime, but I would also just offset that with the fact that when we're currently down about 150 functioning sworn officers at this point, you have to account for that as well. And the fact that, again, that we're dealing with a significant unprecedented increase in crime for this year. But I don't have those specific details in terms of seasonally what those decreases are over years.
Okay, but we do see a decrease during the colder months, so I think that point is there. You had said that these officers are meant to prevent violent crime. What exactly will they be doing during these 12 mid-watch shifts?
Madam Chair, to Councilmember Cunningham, so this is really about also looking at the data, making sure that our Minneapolis liaisons are giving them the areas in which we're experiencing violent crime throughout our city. That may mean if there's information as to a pattern of car jacking suspects in certain neighborhoods, to focus on those neighborhoods. If we are seeing through shot spotter activations an increase of shootings in a particular neighborhood, whether that be Central neighborhood or Jordan neighborhood, making sure that we have resources there to help respond to that, coordinating with our camera technology as well. And so again, it will be really looking at where throughout the city that data is telling us where we're experiencing some of this and how we can, through that really focused enforcement, how we can really try to do our best to prevent and mitigate some of the violent crime that we've been seeing this year.
So is that through, thank you for that. So is that through 911 response or general patrol with self-directed calls?
Again, because we haven't gotten into the weeds in terms of all this logistically, but I actually could see it as a hybrid. For example, if in fact Metro Transit Police were to be a partner in this, under Chief Frizzell's leadership, they have done a wonderful job at least focusing on those public transportation hubs and corridors throughout our city. And some of those have been extensions, unfortunately, in some neighborhoods where violent crime has occurred in and around main public transportation corridors. So that could consist of a detailed focus enforcement, or it could also, as they're working throughout our city and certainly on our same radio channel, picking up calls for some of those same areas, whether it's Chicago and Franklin or Broadway and Lindale, and providing another response and helping those precincts out that may be oversaturated or overloaded with the volume of 911 calls that they're dealing with.
Yeah, I mean, I'll just say for Ward 4, which falls within the 4th precinct, where I would imagine some of these resources would be allocated, that we don't see a particular concentration of violent crime happening around transit. It's tucked into neighborhoods. So I think that's like, so when we think about how we actually have them out in community, how are they actually doing enforcement? Are they patrolling by driving around? What is driving their behavior? I know you keep saying the data, but can you say more about how that's actually applied in this instance?
Yes, Madam Chair, to Councilmember Cunningham. So all of us, I'm sure, on the call knows that Metro Transit Police Department, for example, they've continued for years to help keep our city and our public transportation hubs safe, and they're doing that right now as we speak, and they continue to do that. Some of that work that they do is through being dispatched to calls throughout the city, throughout our city, to help us with issues and crime that occurs in and around those public transportation hubs. But I would also say that we would be allowed under this agreement to have focused enforcement details. So if in fact there is a situation that might be occurring with a gun violence or, for example, situation around Merwin's Liquor, we could utilize and create details specifically to address gun violence or assaults that may be occurring in certain parts of the neighborhood. Again, we would have this resource to focus on that. While the Minneapolis Police Department, our men and women, are responding to those typical or traditional 911 calls, this would be an added body that could help us focus on some of those. We have a gun response unit who's identified individuals in our communities who are causing harm, using guns to shoot at in neighborhoods, shoot at homes and individuals, and this would be an extra added resource that we could have through the data, and that's what I mean, the intelligence-focused data that they could be utilizing to help coordinate details throughout our city to bring some of those folks to be held accountable.
I'm glad that the gun violence unit, that they have that information, and I hope that they will pass it along to the folks who are leading the enhanced GVI work. Do you know what the progress is actually on that staff direction related to the targeted enforcement through the enhanced GVI work? Because that's very specific to gun violence. And so I'm curious as to the progress from MPD's side of things.
Madam Chair, to Councilmember Cunningham, just for clarification, the staff direction is specific to data that they're requesting, or?
So the conversations that you have been a part of around the Northside gun intervention that we had talked about, which is the enhanced GVI and the role of MPD within that. I am curious about the progress of MPD's role within that, namely around the data component and what the plan is for targeted enforcement.
Madam Chair, to Councilmember Cunningham, my last conversations with our team, specifically and Deputy Chief Fours, who oversees sees the gun response unit team, is that they are still out there. They're still working. They're still with the data. They're still focusing on those individuals. They're continuing to make arrests. They're continuing to make gun recoveries, and so that work has not stopped. So in terms of status, it continues to be ongoing, and we can certainly get you in terms of gun recoveries, arrests, prosecutions, working with both our federal agencies in terms of holding those folks accountable for federal gun crimes as well. So I know that work has not stopped, so that status continues to be ongoing.
Yes, which I'm glad to hear, but that's not related to specifically the strategy that and the intervention that, like, it's supposed to be coordinated with the Office of Violence Prevention, the Northside Promise Zone, like it's supposed to be coordinated, and it cannot be coordinated if that data is not being shared and if it's not being prioritized. So I think that one of the challenges that I have is, like, here is an explicit priority around and strategy that is evidence-based that we have worked on together and identified as a pathway forward to targeting gun violence intervention in a coordinated both and kind of way. And we cannot move forward because the data has not been made available to the partners. And so it's like that slows down the entire process. That just makes me, from my perspective as a policymaker who's really been digging into this work, it's hard for me to say, yes, let's go ahead and put more resources into like this broader strategy, like casting a wider net, hoping to be able to get to the issue when we have a strategy that the city council has passed as a pathway forward to wrap resources around. And so I think that we need to be still prioritizing that, given that that was something that the city council had passed. And then the last question that I have is, what's the plan for January 1st, given that this contract would be from November 15th to December 31st? What would you say is the plan beyond that? Like, are we going to have to keep coming back for $500,000 every month and a half, or until a recruit class is through? Like, what do you see as the plan as of January 1st?
Yes, Madam Chair, to Councilmember Cunningham. So I will follow back up, or I'll have DC Force follow back up with you regarding the status of the data that you're seeking, and so I'll make sure that you get some follow-up to that. I also just want to say too that we don't, the Minneapolis Department, we don't cast wide nets or big nets. We cast specific tailored strategies for people, and that's why data is so important. The days of casting wide nets and if you get 200 people and hoping you get 2 with crimes, that's not the way and direction that we go. We rely heavily upon our analysts and our folks out there who are investigators, who know those communities, who know the individuals who are committing those crimes, and so that is not a direction that we go to, as casting a wide net. And we can continue to do transformational change and at the same time focus on reducing crime in our communities. In terms of the contract or the funding that we're looking for, it would be 2 pieces. One would be to get us to the end of this year, and then the next would be to come and discuss what 2021 would look like. With the reduction in our resources, even with if the proposed 3 classes were to go through for 2021, we would not see a dividend of those until the end of the year. And even with that said, we would still be operating at a deficit. So my hope is that we would be able to continue to use this mutual aid resources throughout 2021.
I'm sorry, Madam Vice President, if I may ask a quick follow-up question. If that's the case, are these contracted officers, would they be subjected to our discipline process or get any sort of training related to our policies? Like, will there be would that be the case? And do you plan to come back with the contract once you negotiate that, or is this authorizing the contract preemptively?
Madam Chair, to Councilmember Cunningham. So these agencies, again, under a mutual aid agreement, it does not abdicate their own department's policies and procedures. There's certain rules and standards of conduct that are expected, and these agencies, as licensed peace officers, have to adhere to. So for that example, if a community member during one of these joint enforcement teams details experiences an officer who's not part of the Minneapolis Police Department, they feel they are violating their rights or have committed some egregious misconduct, they absolutely have the right to take that to their to that agency's supervisors and file a formal complaint. In terms of the process of taking or advancing contracts through this process, that is something that obviously I believe the elected officials and our city attorneys would have to have that discussion. I'm trying to, again, recall back in 2014 how that process was. A little bit different because, again, it was more through the summer months. It was just a contract that was based just from June 1st to August 31st. So it was a one-time, once a year type of contract. And so this would be the first time asking for these resources to extend us past this year into next year.
Chief, with your permission, may I answer that a little bit as well?
Madam Chair, permission for Director of Finance, Ms. McPherson to.
Yes, Ms. McPherson, please respond.
Committee Chair and Councilmember Cunningham, this RCA that's in front of you is 2 things. It is an appropriation, and it is also a resolution, and it is also a request to contract with the 2 entities, the 2 agencies who have expressed interest in providing officers for us. The contract itself is for 45 days. It ends as of December 31st. So anything that was going into 2021 would require an additional RCA coming through specifically for 2021.
Does that help, Councilmember Cunningham?
I've been talking a lot, so I don't want to take up too much more space. I guess so then the answer to the question is yes, we are preemptively approving this contract when we don't know what the terms are quite yet of like the details. So we're giving permission for the chief to negotiate that and move forward. And then if that changes, then we will have a different RCA and a different contract starting January 1st. Am I hearing that correctly?
That is correct. And regarding the liability and things like that, the liability on here is similar to the past JET agreements, which means that basically for workers' comp and liability itself, the entities, the home entities, so to speak, are responsible for their liabilities.
Thank you.
We have been working, I'm sorry, can I add a little bit to this? We have been working with the city attorney's office already. We do have a draft contract, and we are actually trying to finalize that, but it obviously depends on what happens, you know, within council itself.
Madam Chair, may I provide a little more information?
Certainly, please.
Thank you. Eric Nilsson, Deputy City Attorney, Civil Division. Yeah, in terms of process, as with all of our contracts, the actual contract itself does not come before the council for approval. Your authorization is to the proper city officers to enter into the contract and to effectuate any documents necessary to effectuate the agreement, and the RCA calls out the primary deal points. So in usual fashion, that's usually the cost, the total cost, and so that's also why there is the appropriation resolution here. Echoing Robin McPherson's point, the past precedent in terms of mutual aid agreements and joint powers agreements is that the reporting jurisdictions, all reporting jurisdictions assume their own liability and defense and indemnification. Of course, that's subject to negotiation, but that's always been our position. And in fact, the joint powers state statute, that is the default position. So the state statute is Minnesota Statutes 471.59, and it specifically references that the participating governmental units, or excuse me, a governmental unit that participates in a joint powers enterprise is not liable for the acts or omissions of another unit participating in the venture unless they've agreed to that in writing. So the default is the position that we've taken in previous JET contracts that have been executed.
Thank you, Mr. Nielsen. Are there any questions for City Attorney Nielsen? Seeing none, Councilmember Fletcher, then Gordon and Osman.
Thank you, Chair Jenkins. And just to put a little finer point on the discussion that we've been having with Councilmember Cunningham and with the city attorney, it's my understanding that if this was happening within the funds available that we've already made available to the Minneapolis Police Department, that they would not need our authorization for this, that in fact these mutual aid agreements exist, that there's collaboration that happens all the time. We've seen some actually good examples of it lately in relationship to the sheriff and state troopers working together with MPD around drag racing, for example. So we know that this kind of mutual aid and collaboration happens. I believe it's authorized. I don't actually think it's a bad idea to contract for some of the services that we've authorized MPD to perform. In fact, I've publicly speculated that maybe we should contract all of our patrol function to another agency so that we can get a fresh start, given some of the challenges that we've observed with the Federation contract and with this department. So I'm not opposed to contracting as an arrangement. And I do take very seriously the rise in violent crime that the chief referred to. It's very important to acknowledge that the level of gun violence in particular in the city is unacceptable. And we have a history of a form of structural racism in our policing that we've heard loud and clear from the community is both over-policing and under-policing, right? That we have both seen over-targeting, over-harassment, over-arrests in communities of color, and also seen an under-responsiveness. And so I take that seriously, and I recognize that we need to be thinking about both of those things. What I'm concerned about is the strategy seems to be to add to patrol. And in fact, it seems to be to just boost patrol by about 5%. So we're going to take a thing that has not been working very well and has not been addressing carjackings, has not been addressing the rise in violent crime with any particular effectiveness or strategy, and say if we just do 5% more of it, that'll get us to a better place, and I'm struggling to get my head around why that's a good idea. But in recognition of the fact that this would be something that is authorized if it is within the MPD budget, we should really probably focus on the budget ask. We should really probably focus on the budget and on the question of, are we going to increase the Minneapolis Police Department's budget by $500,000 today? On very short notice, without a lot of information being given to us about what's actually going to happen with that. And I have to say, I know that the easy answer to that we're going to get to the question I'm going to ask about how could we possibly have spent through the $185 million given how much less policing we got for it. I know that the easy answer for that is that we have a police federation contract that seems to allow an unlimited number of people to take an unlimited amount of leave for unlimited amount of time. And so I'll posit, I'll sort of editorialize here along with, I imagine, several of my colleagues and maybe many in MPD administration, that the Police Federation contract as currently written is a threat to public safety, is a major, major barrier to us actually providing public safety. And I think that's important to acknowledge. I do, though, have a really hard time, even with those constraints, understanding how a police department with the highest funding it has ever had, at $185 million, even after the mid-year cuts, and the lowest staffing level it's had because of attrition in many, many years, somehow has spent through its entire budget. And that feels like, have we mismanaged overtime so much that it's just eaten the whole budget? Or is there some other explanation for what's going on? We didn't run a recruit class that we paid for. There's all kinds of things that we paid for. We've closed down many, many units that used to provide all kinds of services that we're just not even trying to provide anymore. And somehow, with all of that loss of output, with all of that loss of outcome that we're experiencing, we've still got $185 million going into the department. And this department's coming to us a month before we pass a budget and asking for an extra $500,000. And if we do this, it's going to make it that much harder for us to find any of the things anybody's looking for in the budget, whether that's mental health response, whether that's any of the great stuff that people are talking about in violence prevention, whether that's the additional policing that apparently the chief is going to come to us for. So I just want to name that, like, spending down the contingency right now feels really, really ill-advised and challenging. But I really would like the chief to give us a clearer and more detailed answer, and maybe this needs to be in writing later. Maybe it's not actually something that you can provide on the podium here, but if there's on the virtual podium, if we can, I would really like a better answer about where the $185 million has gone, because it just seems like it didn't go into producing the outcomes that we would have expected, and I'm having a hard time seeing how you can't find it within your department.
Madam Chair, to Councilmember Fletcher. So let me start by saying this here. Whether it's a $185 million budget or a $585 million budget, I have 74 people who are no longer alive in this city because they've been killed. I've got almost 500 people who've been shot and wounded in this city. We can go back and forth on the $185 million, but that is not stopping the bloodshed that is occurring every day in our city. And so we can go back and forth on this, but every day that we go back and forth on this, people are dying in our city. And so I'm asking the council to look within themselves. We can have this conversation about both, and we can talk about reimagining policing. I'm talking about what is necessary today in this city, and we need extra resources. And so I know that $185 million budget, Director McPherson, our finance director, is on the line now. I know that at least 90% of that is salaries, wages, and benefits. So it's not like I'm sitting on a treasure chest of an exuberant amount of money that's not being utilized. This city is experiencing unprecedented crime. Councilmember Fletcher, if you have a suggestion of how to do it better, please let me know. I've been doing this job for 3 decades. I'm coming to you saying that we need this extra resources. If you choose, and you have every right to, if you choose to say no to these victims of crime, then please stand by that. I'm saying we need more resources today and right now.
Councilmember Fletcher, did you have a response or should we move on?
I would like a response. I do think it's reasonable to ask for a basic level of budget transparency, but we'll, like you said, we'll have that conversation. So let's talk about how these resources are actually going to stop the crime that's happening. What is the actual strategy? If we're talking about adding patrol, like if what's happening is we're adding patrol and we're adding, we're increasing our patrol by about 5% based on the last numbers you've given us about what our patrol levels are. How does that actually address the problem? We've got miles and miles and miles of public realm to police. I know we can use data to put people in some proximity to where we're going, but this doesn't sound like the kind of targeted strategy that we've been asking for. We've been asking for a long time, what is the strategy? How are we targeting? How are we actually getting to disrupt the actual patterns of violence that are happening? How have we not been successful in apprehending a small group of people who are committing crime after crime after crime when we see these carjackings and when we see this stuff happening? And it is challenging to us to have a budget request that doesn't feel like it addresses the issues that we've been raising. So I'd really ask you then, if you're saying these are the resources you need, show your work a little. What's going on? Like what's the plan to use these resources to actually disrupt the actual patterns of crime that we're seeing?
Madam Chair, could you hear me? Councilmember Fletcher, to your question. So the police department is part of an ecosystem. We are one part of a system of public safety. I'll give you an example. Just the other day, the men and women of the Minneapolis Police Department stopped some individuals who had been in a stolen car, and one of those individuals had 8 offenses, 8 criminal offenses, and they were out on the street again. Our folks are arresting people. They're holding people accountable. They're taking felons in possession of guns and they're bringing them to jail. Those folks are going to the court systems. They're back out in our communities. And by the way, if you ask community members, they will tell you the same. We are part of an ecosystem. If this narrative that we as a police department are going to, we're the sole responsibility of this broad criminal justice system, that's a misinformed narrative. I'm right now, I'm not going to go into an exact strategy. And quite frankly, I'm here asking for the offer. Okay, we have not signed any agreements yet. I will work on strategies. I have qualified, capable leadership teams that work on strategies. We will do that. But to say that we have not shown our weight in terms of our lane of trying to keep this city safe, that is false. We have recovered more guns in this city, and we'll have a record number of guns this year. Our gun response unit is charging people. They're taking them to court. They're working with our federal partners to hold them for felony crimes. But again, we are part of an ecosystem, and we need all partners to step up and hold our community members who are harming our communities accountable. And so this is not the platform, I don't believe, to start drilling down on a specific strategy that we, quite frankly, haven't even, this hasn't been voted on. But I have qualified, capable leadership to do that. But we're going to continue to do that. Our men and women are showing up each and every day as they have this year, rushing into harm's way to help our community members, trying to deal with when you have over 500 people shot and wounded, that drains resources. We are not at the same capacity in terms of personnel that we were last year. And so, again, we need these resources. But to say, because you feel that you haven't seen the satisfaction that you like in this, and just to throw in the towel, I'm not going to do that. Our community relies upon me as chief to keep them safe, and so I will keep fighting for them. And so that is my position, and that's where I stand.
Okay, our next council member in queue is Councilmember Gordon.
Thank you very much, and I have confidence that we all want to make sure that we have the safest city possible for most people, and that's what this is all about. So I really appreciate everybody's good intentions, and I'm also trying to be as open-minded as I can. So I want to be able to hear from my colleagues about this specific approach. As we're having this discussion and having this come up and me learning about it from the media, I think last night and not having much time to prepare for it. And it does look and it sounds like some people have had a lot of time to prepare for this. So I understand you, a lot of you might be way ahead of it than me. But I am struck that this isn't in the right committee for this. This should be at public safety. We should have an opportunity to review it there. In fact, we just passed something in public safety that feels a lot like this. There was a really clear staff direction, and we were going to be focusing on the promise zone in North Minneapolis, and we were going to be looking at our group violence interruption. And the staff direction beautifully outlines who will be at the table there, and it includes the police department with a very strong presence there. It's a collaborative effort with the Office of Violence Prevention, Minneapolis Police Department, relevant Hennepin County agencies, I assume the sheriff, and national and local experts, as well as North Side Street outreach teams, community leaders, and service providers to enhance our group violence intervention strategy, with a particular focus on data-driven street outreach, engagement, and social services with highly talented law enforcement for individuals who remain violent. This sounds like a place we might want to put $500,000 if we had it. So it might be good to give us a chance to let the Public Safety Committee review this proposal in more detail and dig into some of the specifics. It also might make a lot of sense for this to go through the budget process. What I'm actually hearing the chief saying is that, and I believe I'm hearing Councilmember Palmisano say, we're already obviously going to be dipping in pretty extensively into our contingency funds just to cover the over expenses on the police department already. And so maybe we need to regroup and put this in the budget for next year, because I think the intention here is obviously that not only would this kind of partnership be operating when we're moving into the coldest and slowest months of the year as we're ending this year, but we're also going to want to keep it going all of next year, at least until we have more cadets. I'm not going to necessarily move referral back to committee. I'll just announce that I think I would support that motion. It seems like it could be a really good idea and we could have some deeper discussion. I also want to invite my colleagues who've been quiet on this right now and feel that this is something that they may need, especially in their wards. I would encourage them to speak up so that I can understand that. I certainly want to be sensitive, especially to parts of the city that have seen more intense gun violence and bloodshed than we've seen in maybe my part of the city. Thank you.
Councilmember Osman.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I think we all understand that public safety is a real concern in our communities, especially in Ward 6. We are experiencing violence, crimes, carjacking. People are afraid. Businesses are afraid to open their doors, especially on Chicago and Franklin. So the question is, what are we doing about it? You know, we can talk about the long-term public safety plan, but we need answers right now. I'm getting calls, text messages, and so on, coming in within 3 months from a campaign. That's all I hear. The public safety concern is #1 concern in Ward 6. People are demanding people that we put to take care of our safety, which is the chief and the police, to come in and help them out. So I'm looking at this and really trying to figure out that as the leaders of our city, we have a responsibility. We just have to find a way to find a solution what's going on right now. We can all talk about planning in the future, what the public safety will look like, and so on. But as the chief put it, our city's bleeding, which is kind of says it all for all of us. And I'm really asking our leaders to respond to our resident request. The business owners that are contacting me and that are worried about continue in their businesses because of all the other things that are going on in their lives, dealing with COVID, and now they are worried about their safety and if they want to continue even living here or continue even having their businesses in our city, in our ward. So I just want to put that comment that the concern is there, safety concern is there, and the residents are demanding actions from the chief and the leaders of the city. Thank you.
Thank you, Council Member. Council Member Ellison.
Thank you, Madam President. I wanted to start off just by saying everybody here has a deep concern about public safety, right? I think that there appears to be a framing of you either think that the issue is bad enough or you don't. And every single one of my colleagues knows that if that's how you're framing the argument, that's so full of BS and that is so insincere, and I'll call it out. Anybody on this council who wants to act like the conversation is who cares and who doesn't, it's totally insincere, 100% insincere. And I'll call it out, and I'll put my name back in queue and call it out. The conversation is with over 70 homicides in our city, what is going to work? Is this strategy going to work? And what I'm hearing is that we don't have to put together a strategy. We don't have to put together a plan. We don't need to provide any budget transparency. Shut up and pay us. Shut up and feed the beast. Put your money here. We don't have to prove anything. If you care, put your money here. We don't have to prove anything. But as you said, Chief, over 70 people are dead. So you want to talk about satisfaction? According to you, $184 million of the people's money down the drain. Over 70 people dead. And you're asking about satisfaction? Of course I'm not satisfied. I don't think Steve's satisfied. I don't think anybody on this call is satisfied. And so what we're asking for is if this is the $500,000 that's going to get us over the hump, when the first 184 million was not it, then what's the strategy? What's the difference here? No strategy, no plan. Shut up and pay us. That's all I'm hearing on this call. That's all I'm hearing. And you want to talk about being focused? Councilmember Cunningham drafted a plan, brought in experts, both locally, our own local experts and national experts. We have a plan in place, but we don't have the political will to actually pursue it. And we know it will work. It's worked in more dangerous, more volatile situations in other cities. It's worked here. Violence Interrupter program has worked here in the 90s when things were way worse than they are now, and they're bad now. So we have a strategy. Everybody here has the same goal, so I don't want to hear that from anybody else on this call. The question is this the $500,000 that gets us over? And all I'm hearing is, we don't need a strategy, we don't need a plan, shut up and pay us. I'm sick of it. And I'll be voting no on this proposal until I can understand in detail how this $500,000 versus the first 184 is going to get the job done.
Madam Chair, to Councilmember Ellison, I don't believe I've ever said that shut up and pay us. And I don't believe I've ever said that there won't be a strategy or plan. I came to this body today to talk about the need for resources. Nothing's been done, nothing's been signed off or anything. And so I just want to reflect that for the record, that I've never said shut up and pay us or that we won't have a strategy. We create strategies each and every day out in our precincts and our investigative divisions to deal with aspects of violent crime and on behalf of those victims and how we can prevent victims. And so, so I just wanted to make sure the record reflected that.
Council President Bender.
Thanks, Madam Chair. I'd have to go back and look at the transcript, but the Chief, your response to Councilmember Fletcher's questions about the budget were pretty pointed. So if your intention was not to draw some sort of line in the sand, I'm not sure. You know, it certainly seemed that way, that you were either implying or saying directly that if you don't support this, you don't care about crime or violence, which I think, as Councilmember Ellison very eloquently just said, is really deeply offensive to, I think, especially the council members who have rolled up their sleeves, who have begged for data that you say that you're using to make decisions. If we have the data, if you're using the data, why won't you just share it with us, with the Violence Prevention Office, with the Civil Rights Department, with all of the other departments in the city that are trying to work with MPD for an all hands on deck approach to violence? I put myself back in queue because I just want to be very clear that, I mean, we've heard from you, Chief, we've heard from the inspectors. This money isn't going to stop the carjackings. We know who the perpetrators of the carjackings are. They have been arrested many times. They have been given services by Hennepin County. Those interruptions have not worked to date. I believe Councilmember Cunningham's constituents are going door to door as volunteers in their own time, talking to the families, trying to support them, to try to find some way to both support the 12 and 13 and 14-year-olds who are involved in those crimes. This money isn't going to stop those crimes from happening. We know who the perpetrators are. They have been arrested many times. They are in the system, and the system isn't working neither to support them and their families, nor to stop the crimes from happening. And so I think when you hear questions from us, it is because this money is being framed as a solution to a problem it will not solve. And it isn't our idea to ask these questions. We get these questions from our constituents, from the public, who is paying the $184 million budget, for which apparently we are not allowed to know anything about. It is very frustrating. And I will note, you know, we have started to get more updates, the most I've ever seen during my time in office, more transparency. We are repeatedly told by city leaders, by MPD leaders, by folks who don't support giving the council more control over the police department directly, so that you would, for example, be more responsive to staff directions like the one Councilmember Cunningham brought to interrupt the violence that's impacting his community, to use our budget process to increase transparency and responsiveness. The public tells us to do that. So I want people to understand, this is what that looks like. This is what it looks like to use a budget to increase transparency and accountability. This is what happens when we ask questions of our police department. This is the kind of response we get. We hear there's data being used to make decisions, but no one has seen the data. We're being sort of told or implied that if you ask questions, you don't care. But I just want people to know the very opposite is true. The council members who are asking these questions are the council members who have spent countless hours meeting with their precinct inspectors, going door to door in their communities, working with the beat officers, working with the Office of Violence Prevention, using their own time to talk with folks who have been victims of crime, convening meetings with the county, trying to get a handle on what's happening with the juvenile offenders. These are the council members who are putting in the work, who are showing up day after day. They are going to keep doing it. We will transform our system of public safety in this community because our community is demanding it. This is just one vote on a very long road. It is not as consequential as the debate we are having, which is about much more. So I think no matter what happens here today, it is clear the direction that we are going as a city. But it is frustrating to hear that, you know, the response to the questions is a sort of implication that we shouldn't be asking them in the first place.
Madam Chair, to Council President Bender, with all due respect, I think that it's deeply offensive that you characterize my statements in the manner that you did. I stand by my statements. I'm trying to do the best I can to see if this body will provide some resources that our communities desperately need. And so the decision ultimately is with the council, but I will continue to bring forth those requests and the sentiments of the majority of Minneapolitans that I have been in conversation with in all four sectors of our city.
Councilmember Goodman.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Chief Arredondo, I hold you in the highest regard for speaking your truth. You are the person who has been chosen to lead the department, and I stand by you. And I know there are a lot of other people on the call and in the community listening to this who also stand by you. For me, this is pretty simple. In January, we had about 874, 75 sworn officers. And as of last week, there were 713. That's a loss of 154 people. Some of them have left because they've wanted to retire. Others felt driven out by the way they've been treated by elected officials. And some of them have claimed PTSD and are gone on medical leave. But most of them were still paying. So we're in a situation where we have to pay for people who are on medical leave. And that is a fact. It's pretty simple. This is an effort just to get a few more feet on the street. And those feet on the street to a lot of victims really, really matter. I got an email from a constituent, let's see, it was on the 10th. On September 1st, I was beaten, robbed, and carjacked by several young men in front of my apartment building in your ward. Luckily, neighbors were there to help me. It's cost me thousands of dollars in medical bills, repairs, replacement. I'm scared to death to walk out on the street or walk my dogs. Please help us by fighting for real change and continuing to speak out. This is not a crime perception issue. I have another constituent who many of you had heard was violently carjacked, assaulted in the street, and left there a couple of weeks ago on a Saturday in the ward that I represent. They left, I don't need to tell you all the whole story, but the long and short of it is her phone was left in the car. And so because the neighbors were able to call 911 fast, and because it was a Saturday afternoon, the 4th precinct was able to get there fairly fast and track her car down on the north side and arrest 4 people, 3 of whom were let out that following Monday. And now she's afraid. They have her wallet, her computer, her phone, they know where she lives, and she's now afraid to leave her house. The woman whose car was stolen and used in the carjacking that my constituent went through has been pretty vocal about her fear about being carjacked, having her car stolen, and having no one caught in those kinds of situations, and now she's afraid. So this is not a perception of public safety issue. Even a handful of more officers mean calls will be responded to faster. Even a handful of more officers might free up time to investigate. This constituent of mine has been now without her everything for more than 3 weeks. And there are 16 cars ahead of hers to be fingerprinted. She can't get her car back, and they haven't been able to take fingerprints. So she's been without everything she needs to work, and she's waiting for someone in investigations to try to get some fingerprints to build a case. We are short-staffed. It is pretty simple. 874 down to 713 sworn officers, and I'm sure the chief can tell us that the 713 really represent about 500 people who are actually doing work on the ground on a daily basis. This is not an either-or decision. This is a both and decision. We need to solve the systemic problems with policing in our community, as do every other city council around the country. We need to develop violence interruption and violence prevention plans. We need to stop using words like abolish and defund, but we also need to stop using words like reform. We probably need to see policing a completely different way. But until then, life goes on and crime is committed and people are afraid, and having a few extra feet on the street will make a difference to a whole number of people. So in the end, this action passing today will allow the chief to negotiate with these other agencies and have people on the ground in short order, perhaps within a week. Any kind of delay in discussion is just simply not wanting to add anything to the police department budget, and people who want to do that, have that opinion, are entitled to their opinion, and I respect it. But I personally think that we can do both things. We can work with Councilmember Cunningham and others on violence prevention and interruption at the same time that we adequately have enough people on the street. We do not have those people on the street right now. And I'll note, we have this JET program downtown right now. It's so interesting that we're using it to stop drag racing right now. We have the Metro Transit and the sheriff on their own detail working right now downtown to stop drag racing. Thank goodness, I would say. Others would say that might be frivolous. Why is that okay for downtown, but not okay for hot spots in other areas in the city? I can't imagine they're going to want to be working with us for free for a long period of time, but this is the chief has brought forward as a solution that he can bring up now. And I'm kind of just sad that we don't take his word for it. And just, I'm not saying we should just let the chief do whatever he wants, but I think he's made a pretty impassioned case for what he thinks should happen right now. And we need to be doing both and. This is no longer an either or. We are the people leading the city. And I would say that many of the people watching this right now will be disgusted and embarrassed by the behavior of many people, probably my behavior as well, depending on which side you're at, looking at the way this has been discussed and the level of disrespect for the chief. It just really makes me sad because I've worked with every one of you and hold you all in high regard and wish that we could come together even on really controversial decisions. We did all vote just recently for a motion, staff direction by Councilmember Cunningham. We have voted for taking money out of the police department to put it into violence interruption. I personally have voted to move money from the police department to other entities. This is not a large amount of money compared to the amount of money the department has, and we need to do something now. I don't want to hear the horror story of yet another victim anywhere in the city, and I know none of you want that either. So this is one solution we can bring forward, and there might be others. And hopefully we can all, quite frankly, grow up and stop arguing with each other and try to have a respectful conversation about how to respect our professional staff. This isn't the only staff member who is treated like this publicly and privately. I hope this is one of the last times that this kind of thing happens amongst this body. Quite frankly, it's embarrassing.
Thank you, Councilmember Goodman. Councilmember Schrader.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I think we do need to talk about the both and, because I think that one part of that has been completely missing. I think that Councilmember Cunningham was a good point to bring up, on the accountability. This isn't just about, more police, less police. It is about the accountability of MPD. It's been almost 6 months since Officer Chauvin from the 3rd Precinct put his knee on the neck of George Floyd. Like, that is how we got into a lot of this. There's been other crises that have all come into it, but we need to talk about what we felt at that moment. It was completely obvious that our MPD had a long way to go. And this is work that the chief's done for years. This is work that previous mayors have done for years. And yet we witnessed that horrific act at the end of May. And so when we're talking about the both and, I want to hear about how discipline is going. I want to hear about how we are ahead of what the Minnesota Department of Human Rights is trying to get us to do. Like, I met with the chief earlier this year to talk about, how were you proactively going after bad behavior. We had, multiple documented cases of officers just breaking policy with peaceful protesters, and we've continued to see that behavior. And what we're not seeing is a public reaction. What we do see is when the police union gets mad, we see leadership get demoted the next day. And so it's that kind of message that the public is seeing, where they're just not seeing the and. They're not seeing the reforms that everybody is talking about supporting and continuing to talk about supporting. They're not seeing those actions. And to talk about giving more money to that department, a department that's seen 2 people killed within 3 years, it is a really serious question and really needs a lot more backing up. And so know that I've been asking for a strategy and for data since the beginning of the summer, and that's not to say it's not to question people's job. It's because that's what my constituents are asking for. They want to help. They want to know. They want to know, get to the bottom of like what is the issue, and that's something that City Council we do not have the information. We have not gotten the data. We have not gotten a strategy. It's very difficult to make these decisions about it. It's such a critically important area when we don't have that data, and it isn't for lack of asking. We have not gotten it, and so for me this really comes down to, do we have the money for this? You've heard that we are in dire, very bad budget, which will continue with COVID. We do not know our financial risk for next year. There are huge question marks about that. And then we have this proposal that's coming outside of the budget process while the budget process is going on. This will only take us through December. If you need to come back in January, I expect that to be in the budget process, which is not there. And I will not be supporting this today. There's too many questions for something that we need to be doing better. We need to do something now. I appreciate that the chief's bringing this forward. I'm happy to work with the chief on more of these issues. I've tried to meet with you, Chief, but the last time I've asked, we weren't able to meet. You've refused. I want to work on getting some strategies. I want to hear this. I think this all needs to be public, so we can have a real idea of where our public safety dollars are going to be invested and how they're going to make this city safer.
Councilmember Palmisano.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Sorry, I'm just recovering from some of the comments just mentioned. I wanted to respond a little bit to some of the concerns my colleagues mentioned. Councilmember Cunningham said this year requires unprecedented accountability, and I agree. One of those things is the fact that this money isn't going into MPD. We're using all of this money, up to this amount of money, to pay other law enforcement to conduct law enforcement in our city. But one of the questions or concerns was about why this would go through council. This is a request for council action from our mayor's office, and it's broad. It's broader reaching about public safety than being just specifically in MPD or in what's been created or OVP. And we've had a lot of help from both of these departments in doing things like really vet out the racial equity analysis as to why this makes sense. But I also want you to know I spoke extensively with our budget director about this in accordance with our financial policies that we pass in every budget year. Yes, this is an amendment to this year's budget. The reason why it ends on December 31st is because January 1st starts a new budget year. So this is something that maybe to some extent could be worked into the MPAD budget, or we could make that budget amendment during the regular council process here in December. But just a good example of kind of when we decide to take money or use contingency money and overspending by departments would be our deployment of contingency money to something like elections a couple of years back. We are legally obligated to hold elections. We knew that the money put into that budget was not going to help us do that in the best way possible. And we said, we'll go ahead and overspend and we'll reimburse you at the end of the year. You know, sometimes there are reasons that we wait to end of year to tie these things out. And sometimes we act now because we want to demonstrate accountability. I weighed these and I felt strongly that if the chief and the mayor did this without council, without our actions, that would seem very not transparent. It would not be who we are. And I felt we needed to demonstrate, especially as we are asking outside agencies for their support, that we are deliberate in these actions. So this is about accountability. And I think it's very reasonable to ask for a written accounting of all of these expenses as some of my colleagues have asked for. I have already had a quick conversation with the city coordinator about that. That's a very reasonable thing to ask for. Not all public safety is planned, but also by necessity, public safety is responsive. So I appreciate, and I'm not blind to the ongoing sentiment of my colleagues, and I just want to say that I hear you. I know that we all would like to have less officers in our community in exchange for something better, but we don't have that something better yet. And what I also don't want is less than nothing. So I think that you can both not want additional officers in our city and recognize that we face an uphill battle that will take time to fix, and this can't be done in one summer. And I ask that we're really honest in this work together, and that's who we are as leaders. I think we are all showing that here today, and we know that this isn't a catch-all solution, and we know that this makes some level of trust in decision making, just as I and others have trusted one another with things like staff directions and things that we don't understand all of the details on. Thank you.
Thank you, Councilmember Palmisano. I put myself in queue and just am really I don't know, dismayed by the level of division that is so apparent in our community, and it really reflects the division that is in our country at this moment. You know, we're discussing this budget as if we just had a regular year, but since March 16th, we've all been working from home. May 27th, the 3rd precinct burned down. We lost a number of police officers to various reasons, which have been discussed ad nauseum before this, and certainly very detailed discussion about that today. You know, I liken the approach to reimagine public safety and to rebuild our system of public safety in this city, which, by the way, if we're going to be very honest with ourselves and with our community, will include some level of law enforcement in any public safety apparatus that we imagine in the future. And we have this enormous challenge ahead of us right now, and that is the crime that is happening, the murders, the shootings, the carjackings, the robberies. All of these things have to be dealt with. If we were remodeling our house, we would have the luxury to move out, and while all of that rehabbing was going on. When we rebuilding our police system, we don't have the luxury to move out of our house. We have to rebuild it while still trying to maintain safety in our community. You know, I was very reluctant to vote for the Northside Gun Initiative, and not because I don't want to see support and reduction of gun violence in North Minneapolis, but because it only addresses North Minneapolis, and there is crime happening all over the city of Minneapolis. Will $500,000 and 12 more police officers per shift resolve all of those crimes? No. But what it will do is provide a sense of action that we are taking as a city to deal with this really heartbreaking increase in crime that is occurring in our city. You know, I'm going to say something that's probably very unpopular, and I'm going to state it because last night I was informed of the fact that one of my cousins, one of my mother's nephews, was murdered, not here in Minneapolis, in Chicago, by another Black person. And that is what's happening in our communities right now. And if we don't begin to talk about that as a community, police can't solve all of these answers. We as community have to step forward and begin to solve these problems too. And just honestly, putting money into all of the support services that we have in fact been investing in is not resolving all of these issues either. It's going to take a combination of all of these things to have true equitable public service, public safety in our community. And so I just wanted to state those things, and I see Mayor Fry and Councilmember Cunningham and Council President Bender are all in queue.
Thank you, Madam Vice President. Some of what you just said was going to be in my comments, and so I'll make these as brief as possible. First, nobody is saying that having these 12 additional staffing positions filled will somehow solve the wave of crime or violence that we're experiencing. But our chief has clearly stated that it will help. He said that he does not have the resources right now to properly respond to 911 calls. In an unprecedented fashion, he's come forward with transparency, be it the data portal or his visits to council, which have been repetitive and more, as far as I know, than ever before. He's shown the willingness to engage. He's showing the willingness to bring additional staff on, like Director McPherson, to answer questions. And, you know, I do think we need to be giving our chief the necessary respect. And this is not just to our chief, this is to all of our department heads, this is to all of our staff. We can't go off on staff when we don't like their recommendations. We can't ignore the data when it doesn't support our conclusions. Right now, I think we need to be giving our colleagues, our staff, our department heads grace and respect. We need to be giving each other grace and respect. We need to be giving our chief grace and respect. And if we can't, you know, I don't think we should continue to haul them in to be belittled like our chief has been at times. You know, I stand with our chief. I support him fully. And I want to emphasize how much work he's been doing and who he is. You know, this is a chief that started out his career as a beat officer on the North Side. This is a chief that, you know, didn't particularly love to carry a gun. This is a chief that literally sued our police department for racial discrimination and won, and he's now our chief. He's moving forward with a transformative model, and I have never heard him give a speech without first acknowledging the harm that our department has done throughout history. The harm that needs to be changed, and he has always stood by transformational change every step of the way. Whether that's in getting rid of warrior style training, both on and off duty, that's making sure there's full compliance with our body camera, or that's immediately firing all 4 officers following the killing of George Floyd. Our chief has stepped up, and I need to step with him.
Councilmember Cunningham.
Thank you, Madam President. I will say that, as Council President Bender was speaking to, I am one of those council members that spends dozens upon dozens of hours, hundreds of hours focused on public safety. I have done the work to dig into it, learn about it. I meet with community members frequently. I work closely with the 4th Precinct Inspector. I have done the work even before being elected into office. So I start off with saying that I am not coming into this conversation having not done the work. Like, I have done a lot of work focused on public safety. That has been my primary focus because it so disproportionately impacts my community. And I live in the middle of a hotspot. So when folks talk about people dying, those numbers are not abstract to me. In my office, while I was sitting here with the window open, I heard the gunshots that killed a 16-year-old just a couple blocks from my house. I live in the middle of this. I care about this, and I spend a vast majority of my time as a council member. With that being said, I do not agree that or accept that I will be lectured for challenging and engaging in an accountable conversation with a department head. That is not disrespect. That is doing my job of oversight as a council member. I also will say that we have in front of us the reality that the criminal justice system that we have, not only here in Minneapolis and around the country, our criminal justice system is broken. And the chief said that the court system, it does not hold up its end of the bargain. We arrest folks, they go into, they're arrested, they're booked, and then they're released back out into the community. When we add the amount of folks who are out doing patrols, we are just adding into that churn and not getting different outcomes as a result of that. What I keep hearing from folks is the need for a both and. And I have been talking about a both and since I got into office. Even before I got into office, I have been talking about a both and. What we are talking about here today is not a both and. And it's being framed as though if you don't support this, then you are either or. And that's not the actual reality that we are navigating right now. The both and is thinking about how we are combining the resources that are in community, whether that's community members, that's community organizations, that's social services, alongside targeted law enforcement. Folks have brought up my staff direction as like an example of a favor that they did for me. There is evidence behind the strategy that is being dug into and what was discussed at committee, the Public Health and Safety Committee, that by focusing on North Minneapolis and the gun violence that happens here, that there are citywide implications in terms of being able to have a population level impact. That's not a favor to me. That's actually good governing. And I brought it forward as resource neutral because of the fact that we are in a budget crisis right now. If we're going to be putting $500,000 into the into public safety, why would we not actually invest into a both and strategy? If we were to have the $500,000 go towards an enhanced GVI strategy, that would allow for it to be citywide, that would allow for it to be for it to have a youth specific component, which our GVI doesn't, our GVI program does not currently have. And so I just want to reclaim the both and, because of the fact that what we are talking about here is not a both and. And I care about safety so deeply. I've talked about it a lot. I've been digging into the work. And what I have brought forward is a targeted enforcement alongside community engagement. I did that in a resource neutral way. What doesn't make sense is for us to continue to arrest people, for them to be booked, and then for them to be released, when we actually can have a strategy that will stop people from engaging in the criminal activity to begin with, and be able to free up resources to actually focus on those who are continuously still engaging in that behavior. So just throwing that out there for consideration. I'm not bringing forward a motion to like move this money, but just talking about where we invest resources. And if you really want to get down with a both and, that's a pathway for us to be able to do that.
Thank you, Council Member. Council President Bender.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I'll be very brief. I see we have a colleague who needs to leave. I did just want to note that, the council took a lot of unanimous actions related to public safety over the summer. A lot of council members who I think sound like will vote for this increase voted to decrease the police budget just a few months ago. And that's okay. It's okay to change your mind, to evolve, to debate. So I just really want to make sure that we create an environment, yes, of respect, but of doing our jobs to show up and ask questions and to ask for information. Other city departments give us information, right? And to imply or say that folks don't care about an issue if they don't support a particular thing is really unfair. We have people living outside in tents right now. It is snowing. So I assume that everyone here cares about that, even though we don't have a proposal here today to get people inside. I assume that people care. I think it's important to assume good intentions. I assume that people didn't get phone calls because council members were busy, not because you were counting through some vote roll, but I don't know, right? So, I don't really think it's helpful to cast the idea of asking questions or even debating an issue, which is literally our jobs in a democracy, as divisive. This work isn't going to be accomplished through campaign speeches or press conferences. This work is going to be accomplished through very challenging work over many years. And the folks here who are leading that work are asking questions, which I think is important.
Thank you, President Bender. Councilmember Johnson.
Thank you, Madam Vice President, and I appreciate hearing from all my colleagues on this. I've just been listening to this conversation and the conversations in my community and what people have to say about this. I agree with Vice President Jenkins that this is reflective of divisions we are seeing nationally. I agree with what Council President Bender just said, that we shouldn't ascribe motives. With this, we know it's temporary, 45 days. There's an opportunity to renew into the new year. We've done JET teams before, mutual aid. I agree with Councilmember Gordon. Ideally, this would come from MPD's budget. I agree with Council President Bender. Police are making a lot of arrests. I also agree with Goodman that staffing is down nearly 20%. And yet we're still paying for these employees. And I agree with the frustration around that. Also, we know that these levels of violence are different right now. They're consuming a lot of resources compared to what we've seen before. And I really appreciated the presentation at committee that Council members Cunningham and Fletcher had, especially with a professor from John Jay College talking about how much of that is due to the pandemic and are part of national trends. I also know that as we're looking at staffing being down nearly 20%, and also the workload increased by having more calls, and also the complexity increased in the amount of time and resources on each call taken, it doesn't take a lot of math to do the numbers and realize that that's going to have an impact on service. I think most of us who agree on this work around transforming our public safety system, we said it would take time. We agree it will take time. And most of us, I believe, from the nuanced statements I've read from my colleagues or listened to over the months, also agree that while we are making immediate changes, we need to have that new functionality up and running, and that we will transition work over, and that we are committed not to let service levels drop to the detriment of our communities when it comes to responding to 911 calls. It's also frustrating, as a number of colleagues have noted, because we're trying to get more information out of MPD. I think Councilmember Fletcher makes a very valid point about the 185 million. Where did that go? And having that level of transparency and accountability. I agree with Councilmember Osmond, who mentioned small business owners and hearing from them the concerns that they've seen firsthand, and my colleagues who've talked to victims of violence and what they're hearing. And it sounds like there's a lot of frustration all around from the chief and from council members. And I agree with the statement as well that, our chief is unanimously supported. And here he is sounding the alarms. And yes, we can disagree with him, we can push back, but it's pretty clear when he's using language like we're hemorrhaging resources that that's a really big deal. And I think it's an important thing to listen to and be open-minded about. I also agree with Council President Bender. It's not necessarily a huge decision today. In fact, the amount we're talking about is 0.25%, but this is also about a larger conversation here. Accountability isn't just with MPD either. I know we've made commitments around launching community engagement. We fell short on the timeline. We had expectations around some of the alternatives that we've funded. And at least I can speak for myself, I don't think those are quite going as expected. And so we continue to try to do better on these alternatives. And we have supported a lot of immediate changes within our budget, within our department, within other departments as well, to try to start this transition and get pieces put in place and moving around it. Overall, as I'm reflecting on the conversations, it does seem like there's a disconnect somewhere because, Councilmember Schrader, I have heard him over and over and over again say, what's the plan, what's the plan, what's the plan? And I agree that details have been sparse. And I think that that's another area where we're seeing a lot of frustration. But I'm inclined to support at this committee today advancing this. I want to see, and I think we deserve more details on what this ultimately looks like. As a number of colleagues have noted, we have very limited levers from the council side. No doubt that's driving a lot of the frustration, I would say. But financial approvals are one of those levers. Between now and Friday, I would encourage, in the spirit of being pragmatic and working together, that if this is to pass today, that we all keep open minds and work together and talk about if there are conditions that we could add as well that would not hinder the ability to get more resources at a time when staffing is down nearly 20% and calls are up. And so clearly that has a service level impact. But if we can put some conditions on ultimately the approval on Friday that improve transparency, improve accountability, I would very much be interested in that. And I'm very interested in talking with colleagues about that. And we'll do so outside of this meeting and see if we can brainstorm some ideas as well. It's not an easy issue on any of this, but I think this is something that is supportable today. Thank you, Madam Vice President.
Thank you, Councilmember Johnson. Councilmember Connell, are you in queue?
No, Madam Chair, I'm trying to figure out my other meeting, so it's figured out. Thank you.
All right, then, Councilmember Palmisano.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I'm not going to speak for a third time. I just wanted to move approval of the underlying proposal and the resolution authorizing the transfer of contingency funds to the MPD and call the question on that motion.
So Councilmember Palmisano has called the question. I believe we need is there a second?
Second.
So we have a motion to call the question, and it's been properly seconded. I will ask the clerk to call the roll.
Councilmember Wright.
And just to be clear, we're voting on that we should vote on this proposal.
Good morning. No.
Madam Vice President, this is Casey. You're voting on the underlying motion, which included a combined motion to call it right now. So the question is the underlying motion of approving the authorization for the transfer of contingency funds to the NPD as set forth in the RCA. That's the vote that is being taken right now by the clerk calling the roll.
So we are not voting on whether or not we should vote. We are voting on the actual item.
That is correct.
I will, is there any discussion? Seeing none, I will ask the clerk to call the roll.
Councilmember Rake.
Aye.
Gordon.
No.
Fletcher.
No.
Cunningham.
No.
Osman.
Aye.
Goodman.
Aye.
Kano.
Aye.
Bender.
No.
Schrader.
No.
Johnson.
Aye.
Palmisano.
Aye.
Vice Chair Ellison.
No.
Chair Jenkins.
Aye.
There are 7 ayes and 6 nays.
That item carries, and we'll go to our full council meeting this Friday for a final vote. Next, we have reports from our standing committees. We will start with the Budget Committee chaired by Councilmember Palmisano.
Thank you, Madam Chair. At Budget Committee, we just received and filed the following departmental budget presentations. The Mayor's Office, 311, Communications, the Office of Emergency Management, and the City Attorney's Office. Those were received and filed at committee with some a fair amount of discussion, and we have nothing to bring to council this Friday. Thanks.
Thank you, Chair Palmisano. The next committee report is the Business Inspections, Housing and Zoning Committee, given by the Chair, Councilmember Goodman.
Thank you, Madam Vice President. There's a lot of items, so I'll see if I can go through them. Item number 1 is approving an application for Benedier Hall at 309 Lake Street. Item number 2 is denying an appeal with regard to a project at 2025 West River Road. Item number 3 is granting an appeal by Chad Dittman for a project for Twin Cities Habitat for Humanity in the 5th Ward. Item number 4 is denying an appeal for a variance in site plan by Michael Riddell at 1219 West 31st Street. Item number 5 is an appeal, I believe, that was also denied, although it was not, it doesn't say on this. I was not on the call during that vote. This, I think, was denied, a conditional use permit and site plan review appeal by Jennifer Young and John Kramer on behalf of the California Building Company. And when I complete this, perhaps Councilmember Schrader can chime in and tell everyone what happened with the committee. I think it was denied. Item number 6 is the liquor license approvals. Item 7 are the gambling license approvals. Item number 8 is a land sale extension for a closing for the wellness project at 2313 13th Avenue South. Item 9 is the Met Council's Rapid Bus Line D project. It's a project easement. Item 10 is a loan for from the Commercial Property Development Fund for a project at 1500 44th Avenue North. Item 11 is decertifying the Grain Belt Brew House from its tax increment financing district. Item 12 is a grant application to the U.S. Department of Labor for Employment and Training Services. Item 13 is a contract with Hennepin County for MFIP Employment and Training Services. Item 14 are contracts with Build Wealth Minnesota and the City of Lakes Community Land Trust relating to our perpetual affordable housing ownership and land trust program. Item number 15 are contracts with Build Wealth and Neighborhood Works Partners for the administrative services for lending under our homeownership opportunity program. Item 16 are appointees to the Workforce Development Board. Item 17 are reappointments to the Public Housing Authority Board. Item 18 is a grant for community engagement from the National Trust for Historic Preservation for an African American Cultural Heritage project. Item 19 is saying that the EAW is adequate for the Duffy Paper 2.0 project in Councilmember Fletcher's ward. Item 20 is a rezoning on behalf of the Twin Cities Habitat for Humanity from the appeal earlier, and item 21 was denying a rezoning at 2301 California Building. This is next to the California Building. I'm sorry for the confusion. I unfortunately had to be off the call for about a half an hour during this long meeting. I'm happy to stand for any questions, and probably Councilmember Schrader could as well.
Thank you, Chair Goodman. I think we have Council Member Palmisano in queue.
No, Madam Chair.
I'm sorry, I'm getting a little, Councilmember Schrader, did you need to, nope, you just said no need. Councilmember Fletcher.
Thank you, Vice President Jenkins. I'll just note, and thanks to everyone on the committee for digging in on this, both at the Planning Commission and the committee here. We came out with a little bit of a contradictory result where we denied the appeal, but also denied the rezoning. And so I'm working to get to a good outcome. If people have questions about that, I know everybody's getting a lot of emails on both sides of that conversation, and I will be happy to fill you in on the details, and we'll talk more at council.
Thank you, Councilmember Fletcher. Is there any other comments? Our next committee report then is the Public Health and Safety Committee, given by Chair Cunningham.
Thank you, Madam Vice President. This Friday, the Public Health and Safety Committee will be bringing forward 7 items for approval. The first is related to the Neighborhoods 2020 plan. There are several actions related to that, which include approving the Neighborhoods 2020 program guidelines and funding formula, authorizing the extension of the current community participation program contracts until July. Oh, my apologies. Let me turn on my camera. Through July 1st, 2021. The third action is authorizing the provisional recognition of neighborhood organizations in the Neighborhoods 2020 program for 1 year. The fourth item is authorizing the addition of clarifying language on the benefits of recognition status of neighborhood organizations in the city of Minneapolis. And then the last is action related to this item is authorizing the continuation of the Neighborhoods 2020 Steering Committee to review programmatic and legislative adjustments to the Neighborhood Revitalization Program, NRP, for the purpose of achieving our equity goals and creating greater flexibility for neighborhoods. And that will report back to the committee on July 1st, 2021. Item number 2 is accepting a grant from the U.S. Department of Housing and Urban Development, HUD, in the amount of $1,628,571 sorry, we're getting some echo there, for a 3.5 year period. So it would total $5.7 million to correct lead-based paint hazards and other housing-based health hazards in Minneapolis residential units for income-qualified properties. Item number 3 is accepting a grant from the Minnesota Department of Human Services / Economic Assistance and Employment Support Division in the amount of $157,113 to assist unsheltered and sheltered homeless persons. in obtaining services, essential services related to COVID prevention and mitigation that will last through September 30th, 2022. Item number 4 is accepting a grant from the Minnesota Department of Human Services Office of Economic Opportunity to support emergency food distribution services through the COVID-19 pandemic. Item number 5 is accepting a grant from the Minnesota Department of Health for work under the statewide Health Improvement Partnership through October 31st, 2021. And number 6 is acceptance of or passage of a resolution accepting the donation from Kidda Fire Safety Products of smoke alarms to the Minneapolis Fire Department to distribute to the City of Minneapolis residents. And item number 7 is approving 6 appointments, 5 of them council, 1 of them mayoral, to the Police Conduct Oversight Commission appointments. I am happy to answer any questions related to the PHS items coming forward this Friday.
Thank you, Council Member Cunningham. Are there any questions? Seeing none, we'll move to our next committee report, the Transportation and Public Works Committee, given by its chair, Councilmember Reich.
Adjusting my screen here. Thank you, Madam President or Vice President. We have several items to move forward, a total of 5. Items 1 and 2 are both street reconstruction projects and the actions to move forward. Item 3 is a construction easement with the Park and Rec to do some stormwater work. And items 4 and 5 are bids, which are standard for the activities of the department. I will stand for questions if required.
Are there any questions? Any questions? Seeing none. The next committee report is the Executive Committee, given by the Vice Chair, Council President Bender.
Thank you, Madam Chair. There are no items coming forward from exec for approval. We did have a presentation from staff about a leadership development program with a focus on race equity. The presentation is in the Executive Committee report online if any council members want to check that out. Staff did say that they need more direction from policymakers on this, so it seemed there was a need to follow up on next steps, but certainly in line with the general direction that council has been giving around focusing in race equity in every aspect of city business and work. So it was great to see that coming forward, really initiated by department heads in the enterprise. And the rest of the agenda is online as well, of course. Thanks, Madam Chair.
Thank you, President Bender. And with that, we have concluded all the business to come before this committee today, and we are adjourned. Thank you.